Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Most of you know me. So for those of you who do know me, you know what I do. And for those of you who are new to the BDC, I help World Law Group's member firm lawyers build connections and share knowledge through our 17 practice and industry groups and this business development committee, which ultimately leads to member firms exchanging referrals and implementing best practices within our own firms. When I'm not helping lawyers make new connections or foster old ones, I enjoy hiking, rafting, or skiing, usually with my very large dog. As Joe mentioned, today we have a mini panel and we are talking about crafting impactful introductions. I've organized and even moderated a number of panels over the past few years, and it's occurred to me, and I think others, that I often hear the same sort of dry formula from many of our panelists when introducing themselves. And I think the introductions are often overlooked because speakers are so focused on the content of their presentations, but we have to remember that the introduction is just as important. I have a panel of business development professionals joining me today, Desiree, Johan, and Sonia, and a couple of special guest lawyers that you'll get to meet later, David and Rocky, who have volunteered to be our guinea pigs. I invite each of our 3 business development professionals to go ahead and take a quick moment to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone.
We'll go ahead and start with you, Desiree.
I'm just thinking about the puppy.
I know.
Hello, everyone. My name is Desiree Pagati, and I'm married to a Wonder Boy. No. My husband's name really is Wonder Boy. I'm also a mother to a pigeon pair, and they are not named after Marvel characters, as is my husband. Professionally, I'm a marketing extraordinaire at ENS Africa, and alongside my team, we tell the wonderful stories to our clients. I'm excited to be part of the panel today, talking about elevator pitches with my fellow panelists.
Thanks, Desiree. Johan?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Johan Sove. I have been the senior director for business development, marketing, and communications at Davies for almost the past 2 years. Davies is the Quebec member of World Law Group. Basically, my role is to support proposals, submissions, research, pitches on the marketing side, events and sponsorships, branding, and internal communications at the firm. It's a balancing act between strategic planning and operations, but I enjoyed very much. The part that I enjoy the most is the coaching of individuals, teams, or initiatives and to see them come to fruition. I love networking, and when I'm not professional, I try to be a runner, and as you can see from the treadmill on my background. So happy to be here, and looking forward to speaking with you.
Thanks, Johan. And last but certainly not least, Sonia.
Thanks very much, Hannah. So I was very conscious that I'm amongst a group of very senior people who come from BD and marketing backgrounds. Now, I'll start by saying that is not my background at all. I trained as an economist. Whatever I learned about marketing and business development, I have learned on the job. And in my career, I've worked in a number of different industries and then fell into legal about 12 years ago. So I've worked in accounting, I've worked in mining, and I've worked in the government public sector area as well. And then, as I said, 12 years or so ago, fell into legal, and 9 years ago came to Minter Ellison. As my esteemed panelists have talked about in relation to their roles, look, my role's not dissimilar. I support our business predominantly with identifying business-to-business strategies in relation to global opportunities, but in particular with a focus on industry sectors where we see potential growth opportunities in different regions. and importantly, aligning those or helping our partners align those with our existing strategy in terms of how we go to market, and to do that in the most efficient and profitable way possible to the firm. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell. From a professional perspective. On the personal front, I have two daughters, and I also recently acquired a 5-month-old puppy who keeps me really busy, and we go for lots of long bushwalks together, and she's always jumping into the water, and I'm sure one day I'm going to get pulled into the lake with her. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. Thanks, Sonia. And welcome to our panel today. Thank you again for joining us. As I mentioned, we're talking about introductions, and there really are sort of two types of introductions. There's the speaking engagement, you know, a meeting or a panel that you are part of, that you get an opportunity to introduce yourself in front of a group, and then speaking off the cuff. One you can really prepare for, and to the other extent, to the other one, it might be a little more difficult. So let's first start with that sort of prepared speech that you would have for a speaking engagement. You know, you're on a panel, you're attending a meeting where you have the opportunity to introduce yourself. World Law Group has a lot of these, as I'm sure many of you know. And one might be tempted to just pull the first paragraph of their bio, which I see a lot of, or use the same bio for everything. I don't know how many times I get the email, oh, just use the bio I sent you for the last one. And while it's great to have that in your back pocket, it's not necessarily the best approach. So let's start with sort of the preparation aspect. Johan, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about what one can do to prepare ahead of time when they know they have this meeting or this webinar where they're on the panel and they get the opportunity to introduce themselves.
Yeah, well, it is very common, and we get asked probably at least once, if not twice a week, from a lawyer partner to get help from an intro. And the first thing I'll ask them is, who are you talking to? What are the conditions? So know your audience, know the format, because it's never one size fits all. Even for those webinars, when you need to introduce yourself, you got to force the organizers to tell you who they're trying to attract, what is the objective, for you to be able to shine better. So know your audience. It's a must if you want to make a better job. The environment. So on which platform or format are you going to be speaking? Is it like you said, Hannah, in front of a large audience? Is it virtual? Is it in person? Is it around the table? Are 50 other people going to be introducing themselves, or are you going to be one of two? Because you want to be memorable. And then you need to tailor accordingly. One thing that I always also encourage people is to avoid acronyms in your introduction. In the legal space, we love them. When I joined, I had to Google probably once a day to see what were the acronyms. But you know, if I told you that I was overseeing the PD for BPs and the CSR and the firm-wide BD, I'm sure that, you know, at least one of those acronyms someone doesn't know. So PD, professional development, corporate social responsibility, business development, and so on and so forth. So I think you can't assume that people know what you are, what you do, where you're coming from. The one other tip I would say is it's an introspective, but you need to know and ask yourself what you want to be known for. If someone walks out of that panel or speaking opportunity, what do you want them to remember from you? And it needs to be a defining moment for you to understand or know what you want to be known for in the marketplace. And it needs, we'll talk about that later, but it needs to be written down and officialized in your head. Last thing, practice and memorize. You know, we always say that, no one does it, but practice it out loud in front of the mirror. Practice smiling. Get comfortable with your elevator pitch, with your introduction.
So Johan, once you've practiced and memorized, what happens day of, you show up, what are some tips to make yourself impactful?
Well, there's no really trick about making yourself impactful. The one thing that you can do is come across as being authentic and genuine. So if you've done your homework and preparation in the right way, the day of, all you need to do is relax, breathe if you're nervous. Some people, well, not some people, most people fear public speaking, and it's something that they fear right after death. I know it's not the case for lawyers. We love speaking and speaking publicly, but for most, it is the case. So practice smiling. Practice your intro. If you get nervous, maybe remember by heart your first line, and it will get you going. Like I said, practice out loud. Use notes if needed, only if needed. When I'm saying be authentic and be yourself, maybe one trick is to in person arrive earlier, or even on Zooms. Usually you can arrive earlier, get comfortable with your co-presenters, with the platform, with some people, and it'll be noticed. Like for athletes, visualize success. So, close your eyes for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and how would it feel, and how do you foresee your best ever elevator pitch being like? If you get a clear image, you're putting chances of it becoming real.
Yeah, and you mentioned arriving early, and I think you all know, if you've been on a panel with me, I open these up 15 minutes at least early for the speakers to do just that, to come in and get comfortable. And then, of course, Joe knows how many practice sessions we've had for panels that we have done together where we practice, and it's not just for the panel, the content itself. The intros are really important, I think, to practice as well. So thanks for that, Johan. We talk about sort of that first impression, Sonia. The first few moments can be critical in really capturing your audience's attention. I know on some platforms you can even see on the little sidebar as a panelist or as an organizer engagement or audience attention, where they give you a percentage of how many people are paying attention to the screen. So how do you make that lasting first impression that commands the room, Sonia?
I think it's standing out from the crowd. What can you say that's different, authentic but different to your other panelists, that's going to be memorable, that's going to make you stand out? I think that's really important. And they say that you have to repeat something 7 times before someone hears what you're saying. So you've got probably your first sentence to catch someone's attention. So your first couple of sentences are really important. Now, when Desiree was doing her intro, what stuck in my mind was her mentioning her husband's surname. I mean, that was different. And then she talked about Marvel. That was different, So it's those sorts of things.
Thanks. And Desiree, she mentioned you. We're going to switch over to you here. That first sentence is important, right? You have that moment to make the impact, but it's not just what you say, right? It's how you say that. That content of your intro, while important, it's not the only element. Desiree, can you talk a little bit about the other side of that, the nonverbal elements of introducing yourself or presenting in general, and the importance of that?
Yeah, I'm not sure the extent to everyone's familiar with the equations for impact, where it's actually very little or has very little to do with what you're saying or the content. So how it's broken down, so it's three parts to it. And so 7% is the content, what you say. 38%, interesting, is how you say it. And a whopping 55%, which is more than half, your body language. So people actually look at your cues, what you're wearing, how you say things, how you tilt your head, rather than what you're actually saying. And so I could really say a whole lot of things that, you know, you would really pay attention to, because you're paying so much attention to the way in which I'm saying it, or just nonverbal cues. And I guess, you know, in face-to-face interactions, you know, there are various cues that we can apply and that we, you know, are so used to, you know, in terms of the voice, you know, the enthusiasm in my voice, you know, how energetic, how interesting that I am. Do I have rapport? Do you think that I have rapport? Am I coming across that way? Non-verbal in terms of, you know, how animated. I'm very animated. So I think in that area, I think I'm a winner. You know, maintaining eye contact. I think I'm quite a shy person. So in person, I probably just look down or look all the way around. But, you know, just to, you know, establish rapport, it's very important to, you know, really maintain good eye contact with the people that you're connecting or trying to connect with. And then I guess your social cues, you know, that handshake or elbow bump in the current context, or the nod of the head, you know, are some of the things that one should or can leverage in terms of face-to-face engagement of.
Yeah, and I think that's where Johan, you know, mentioned sort of in his tips, practice, right? Practice comes into play. Look and see how you are, you know, pretend there's an audience on the other side of that mirror, or if you want to log into your Zoom to see, you know, what do you look like? What do you sound like? And I think that's where practice comes in to play. And so, Desiree, you mentioned the in-person, right? We haven't seen a lot of that in the last almost 2 years. So what about behind the screen, which is a lot of what we're doing right now? You know, hopefully that changes. Is this any different? It seems like it would be harder to have an impact with that, you know, nonverbal element behind the screen. Sort of what tweaks do you make behind the screen for that introduction to be as impactful as if you could, you know, shake someone's hand or sort of look around the room to gauge the audience?
It shouldn't be. And I think, you know, we like to complicate things and think that we need to put on so like an online voice or persona, you know, to connect with people online. But really, you don't have to do too much in lieu of physical presence, or make up too much of that absence of the person standing right next to you. We just need to be our natural, normal selves, you know. And I think you know, if I were to engage with people and I just really went in for it, you know, I think people would actually pay more attention to how weird I'm coming across, as opposed to, you know, what I'm actually trying to say. And so, you know, if you are a person that uses your hands, you know, I use my hands a lot. And so that's what you need to do. Those are the, you know, nonverbal cues that you can bring in to kind of engage your user, you know, or seem interesting, or you know, or seem like you have some kind of rapport. So just use your hands. Obviously don't, you know, block yourself so people can't see you because you're using your hands way too much. But I think it's also important to leverage your own, you know, personal style. You know, there are behavioral cues that you can leverage. So, for example, a projection. I think sometimes people aren't so audible, you know, and it's like, we can't hear you, you know, when you're on that Zoom call, because you're so staged that you're not allowing yourself to really be normal, really to be heard or connect with the person that's on the other side. And so you have people saying, we can't hear you. Your personal energy levels, you know, you don't have to make up too much of it, you know, just really be yourself. And so I think people connect to who you really are. And as you would be in person is really how you should be online, but obviously maintaining and paying attention to, you know, behavioral cues. So for example, you know, are you staying true to the purpose of the presentation? You know, so if you are there for a meet and greet, you know, obviously you'd apply a different style of engagement if you were meet and greeting someone versus if you were presenting. And if you are presenting, are you a guest speaker, or are you brought on as to like to provide expert analyses? You know, that, you know, you'd obviously then just adapt your presentation style to whatever is required or in the presentation. And I think the most important thing that people forget is that, the art of conversation is two-way, so you're not talking at people, so you're talking to people, you are engaging or having conversation with someone else. And so it's really around also paying attention to the cues of the people that you're engaging with. Are they nodding? Perhaps the point that you're addressing is perhaps interesting, and so you need to elaborate a lot more. If people seem to be kind of switched off or looking away or checking time, it means that you need to then just dial it down a little bit, shorten your presentation. And I think sometimes because we all audio, I think you all are looking at me, I fail to use visual aids. And I think where possible, it's important to just leverage, video, you can use polls and these days and the functionality of calls, and like a presentation deck, obviously not too wordy, but I think you do need to just reinforce your presentation with other things so that the person on the other side feels engaged and stays throughout.
Thanks, Desiree. I wanted to ask, this comes up a lot when we do panels. Joe, I know it's come up with us. It's the moderator asking for the short bios in an email for all the panelists. And, it sort of occurred to me, and I think we've shifted how we do this, Joe, with our panels and others in World Law Group. So Sonia, would you recommend if lawyers are on a panel as a panelist or a speaker that they suggest to the moderator that each panelist can do their own intro, because it's hard to put that impact statement that you have. We've talked about these sort of non-verbal, not the non-content related impactful piece of an introduction. Would you suggest that, the moderator leave it to, the individual panelists to do their own introductions?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Obviously, it depends on the situation, but I think wherever possible, that would be the best way forward, because in doing so, the lawyers on the panel, they get to share their genuine, authentic selves with the audience when they're doing their own intros, instead of having someone else represent them and speak on their behalf. And as part of that, they may choose to, share a little story as part of their intro, for example. So, there's lots of different ways they can make that memorable, but I think that is, a very good opportunity for them to do so right at the start to capture the attention of the audience.
Yeah, Sonia, you talk about telling a little story. So we've talked about these sort of guidelines for creating and for how you present yourself. What about the actual content of the intro? Is there sort of a magic formula? You mentioned this story. Are there other things you should, that make up that magic formula for that, maybe 20 seconds you have to introduce yourself?
Well, it's about what's in it for the client. So if we think about our audience, I suppose, look, it depends on whether you are speaking to lawyers from other law firms or whether you're speaking to legal counsel within corporates. It depends on your audience. So tailoring that accordingly and thinking about what's in it for them. So if I was a tax lawyer, for example, instead of saying as part of my elevator pitch, instead of saying, well, I'm a tax partner with Minter Ellison, I work in transfer pricing. Instead of saying that, I might say, I have a number of multinational clients and I help them, avoid any potential risks associated with the Australian Tax Office in relation to their offshore operations. And as a result of that, I save some of them billions of dollars a year. So it's applying that back to the real world scenario.
Excellent. I am conscious of time. This is supposed to be a mini panel. We do have a couple of other items on the agenda. So if you're okay, I'd like to sort of fast forward to have these real life examples of individuals. We've invited some guinea pigs on with us today, David and Rocky, who are going to give us their intros. They've seen sort of our guidelines. They've done a lot of speaking themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and shift gears. And David, if you wouldn't mind taking the floor for us and introducing yourself.
And I might add quickly beforehand that you don't always know exactly when you're going to have to introduce yourself. Sometimes it's 11 o'clock at night, and you just happen to cross an audience or someone who is happens to be the right person at an interesting time. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is David Morfessi, and I apologize if you're disappointed by my accent, being an Australian lawyer. I'm not local. I used to be a U.S. trade negotiator. Finding my way to Australia, I was surprised to find that nobody wanted me to negotiate tariffs with the Brazilians from here. So I found my way to Minter Ellison, which is the largest general practice firm in Australia. And I found my way there because to integrate into a practice like that from an international trade perspective, I now live on an island. And I work with the firm that works with everyone. And when you live on an island, trade is rather important. Given the fact that I spent the first 20 years of my career negotiating trade agreements, I've spent the last 10 helping people to navigate that sea, that landscape that we help form. And these days, more than ever, that's been very important. So in a world that's gone from free trade to sort of managed trade, a much more turbulent sea, we're able to assist people to not only continue with their business, but thrive in an atmosphere that poses almost as many opportunities as it does challenges. So we can't all have sovereign clients. One of my clients is the United Kingdom, where we're helping them with their free trade agreement negotiations. But more often, it's someone who wants to know how to get started or how to take advantage of some of the ingrown and developed opportunities that have been sown by the Australian government, and really have made it a hub for trade in Asia Pacific. So I found myself in a good spot, and with some good weather too. So happy to do that, and actually happy to assist in actually realizing the goals of the policies that I helped put into place.
Great, thanks, David. And Rocky.
Hey, hi everyone. My name's Rocky, and a lot of people sometimes struggle to pronounce my name. So if you say hi, Rocky, I'll say hi. And that's the easiest way to get everyone to pronounce it properly. So I'm a director at ENS Africa, which is Africa's largest law firm. And I'm lucky to be based in the Johannesburg office. We have such beautiful nature. No, really, we don't. It's just a city, but we work really hard here, and we have great weather. I was in Cape Town last year for a bit, which is one of our more coastal cities, and a lot of people have a lot of good things to say about it. But the life of a lawyer is such that I completely hated it because it reminded me of all the things I couldn't do while I was billing. So I'm glad to be back in Joburg. I'm actually a technology and data privacy lawyer, and many people get quite confused. I don't think I don't think people actually know what technology law entails, but essentially I help clients, navigate their rights to use technology in their businesses. We help them, engage with service providers who are going to provide them with these technologies to use in their businesses, to create efficiencies, to become innovative. And through that process, we learn so much as technology lawyers about the actual technology, which is the best part about what I do. I'm extremely fond of all things tech, and always, trying to keep my hand, very close to all the new developments that are taking place. And it's been a very exciting space, especially in the last year or two. Despite the pandemic, it's forced people to embrace technology in a way that they never have before. So, some of the most fun moments of the last year have been seeing very senior partners in the firm, managing partners, very, very senior, older people embrace the platform and understand that there are so many more opportunities when you embrace tech. So, I think that is my elevator pitch, understanding that there was only an elevator ride to go. And from my experience, the elevators in our building are very fast. So that's my pitch for today.
Thanks, Rocky. And I would like to note she defined technology lawyer, and that's on my to-do list. Beth and I were actually talking about this last week, not to sidetrack, but defining a technology lawyer. So thank you. I didn't even have you plant that. That was really helpful for me. So quickly before we sort of wrap up and let everyone give their sort of final key pieces of advice, do our panelists want to sort of talk about what stood out to them in both of those and perhaps what could have been improved? Yes, there are two sides. We talk about the good and the bad, but does anyone want to go ahead? And Desiree, maybe you want to jump in first?
I don't know why my mom named me Desiree. I didn't realize how close I am. With David, I actually the one point I actually was quite engaged throughout. I think your accent, I'm into accents, so that you get me hooked already with the accent, and it's actually quite peculiar because you have a mix of an American and Australian accent. So that was very interesting to listen to. So I like the way that you positioned, how you moved into Australia and what you were doing in Australia and how you got there, and the work that you're involved in. What I would have liked to hear was a bit about yourself personally, but I do also understand that not everyone's comfortable sharing, too much about themselves. So there's also, a good balance there. So I'm actually mindful of that. And then in terms of Rocky, I think I work closely with Rocky a lot. Difficult to give critique of Rocky, but I quite liked how you leveraged what David was saying. So he spoke a lot about the weather, and I liked how you brought that into your presentation, which means that you're engaging with your fellow panelists. Sometimes people come with their scripted, a script, that's so rigid that, I have to say it this way. And, you're not fluid enough to kind of leverage the current. I think, you brought in that personal element in terms of what you enjoy. And I really liked how, you pitched, technology law, TMT law, it almost sounded like something new and interesting that I wanted to know more about. And I guess, kind of by virtue of her saying, oh, interesting, I didn't know, kind of testament to what I picked up as well. And in terms of criticism, I think, it's directly to what you had been asked to do. It was really an elevator pitch, and I don't think there's more or less that you could have added. You kind of made it relevant, in terms of the current circumstances that we find ourselves in, the pandemic, technology law, and how it applies currently. So I guess for me, maybe what I would have liked to see is a little bit more in terms of, that engagement or coming in, or opening yourself, but also it talks to, natural style. Let's do natural style, then, you can't, there's no point in being too overt, so that's my thoughts.
Desiree, I like a point that you made about being fluid. So we talked earlier about practicing and sort of taking your notes, but there is that certain element, which I think takes a while to perfect. You know, it takes you speaking in front of multiple audiences to be able to be fluid and look around the room and say, okay, maybe I had this script, but maybe I need to change it up a little. You know, maybe the weather's bad outside, you're stuck in a conference room or whatever the case may be. Also being able to be fluid. Sonia, did you want to add anything to sort of the critique of our two guinea pigs?
Look, I don't have a lot to add. I speak to David all the time. I know all his stories. They're very, very interesting. So, you know, as he always does, he made it interesting again tonight in relation to talking about how he got to Australia, and the accent's always a great talking point, and made it really relevant in relation to the challenges that businesses face in the current economic climate. And, you know, Raki did the same. You know, technology law is increasingly important to clients and businesses all around the world. It's particularly relevant, you know, in this current point in time, and it's the way of the future. So, you know, I think that in itself was really engaging and very interesting. So it got my attention.
Great. Johan? I'm
not going to take too much time. I'm going to comment probably more on posture and look at the screen. So both were smiling, which is great. It's engaging. It's you know, it makes us want to hear what you have to say. You both spoke clearly, which is great too. David, maybe I would suggest that I know it's late for you, but I can suggest that you sit up a bit more straight. We're amongst each other, but you seem a bit relaxed, maybe a little bit too much, if I can say. But you know, posture is important too. Our body language, and you know, it's something that we need to remind ourselves constantly, in person, virtually. Sitting up straight, I have tendency to go like this. Maybe it feels more engaging when I'm closer to the camera or whatever it is, but we need to make sure that we fit our posture and our look to the audience. So those would be my comments.
Great, thank you, Johan. And I'm just go ahead, David.
I have to comment on that because that's fabulous. You see that I have the blur, if you can tell, on. And not to elicit any sympathy, I'm recently at a hospital, and for my recent birthday, I've gifted myself a new hip, and so I'm blurred. I'm actually in bed, so yes, I am quite relaxed. And it's an amazing observation. I think that's terrific. And
so might that make sense to work that into the intro?
Absolutely. And as far as Desiree's, you know, say, you know, she'd like to know more about me. You can ask Sonia. If you get me started, I keep talking. So be careful what you ask for. And
well, David,
because I have to get it in. Raki, my career in trade started in the international office at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I used to negotiate the IP chapters for the 3 trade agreements. So if nothing else comes of this, you and I have to talk.
Yes,
so
sure.
It's great to meet you.
Same here.
Excellent. So being conscious of time, I just want to sort of skip to wrapping this up and having everyone sort of give their one key piece of advice or mistake to avoid, and try to keep it to 30 seconds each. David had a really great story that is not something I would have necessarily thought of. I think culture comes into this. So David, I'll have you sort of kick it off with your key piece of advice, at least as it relates to you and where you are.
Absolutely, because when we talked about this, and we'll introduce ourselves, And being from the United States originally, we're very good at in the United States about talking ourselves up, about presenting our credentials and what we're good at, and we're very comfortable doing that. In Australia, there's a cultural, there's a name for it. It's a colloquialism here. It's called tall poppies. If you see a field of flowers, and there's one that sticks up higher than all the rest of them, what do you do with it? You chop it off because the rest of them then look uniform. If you talk yourself up, I'm great, I'm terrific, it's not culturally really a thing to do here. You still want to convey the fact that you are the right person, you're the best person for this job, and you're the one who can do something that nobody else can do. But you can't say I'm great. You say I'm the right one, I'm a good one. An elevator pitch is going to be different in Australia, in New Zealand, in Europe, in the United States. Wherever you are, you're pitching to the audience and you're pitching to their cultural perception. And so remember that, because it's very important to know, to be aware of your surroundings and to who you're speaking.
And I'm just going to give a quick plug for our Doing Business In series here, because that is one of the questions that we ask in that. For those of you who aren't familiar, I know a number of you have already submitted where we've asked firms, to talk about sort of the business environment. One of the questions we do ask is that cultural piece and what makes things, doing business, different in your country as opposed to other countries. And I encourage you to consider that, or reach out to your World Law Group colleague to say, hey, I've got this going on. What's something I should keep in mind? Rocky, did you want to add anything to sort of your key piece of advice or mistake to avoid?
I think for me, it's to play to your strengths. So there's a lot of good advice that's been given in the session, but you do have to use what works for you. So for example, humor for me is nice and disarming, and it generates a smile, and that makes me feel comfortable and more open. And I use humor a lot, whether it's in a meeting, in a negotiation, in a presentation, in an elevator pitch. I feel like it's easy for me to do. And most times, and that's the South African part, and I think, leaning on what David says, it's a lot of self-deprecating humor in South Africa, especially. We love to laugh at ourselves. So I actually spent some time in Australia, and I found it extremely confusing because they are not very open about their mistakes, especially their own. So where we come from, South Africa, where we love to laugh at ourselves and laugh at our president and laugh at our parliament, they do not. So those jokes didn't go down very well. So I had to change my jokes. But yes, I think humor can be a great tool, especially amongst lawyers.
Excellent. Johan?
Actually, no further comments for me. Thank you. I'll save you the time.
Perfect. We'll wrap it up. We've hit our three firms on the panel, because I did want to open up the floor for a couple of minutes before we move on to the next agenda item, to see if anybody had any questions or anything that sort of they have taken away from this or can add to it.
And
Just one thing. Oh, go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, and I was just I sent you a quick note before David spoke, and it's a great point. One thing, panels and client pitches, though, especially, I find that younger lawyers particularly have a very difficult time selling themselves. And it could be a Canadian thing, and Johan may agree. A little different than the dynamics in the States. Younger lawyers have a very difficult time promoting themselves. So back to that introduction, I think sometimes the moderator or a lead lawyer should provide that introduction for their colleagues that are attending a pitch, because it's very easy for me to talk about the superstar team I've assembled, and then pass it along to them to give their own introduction. But I often find that people want to hear that. many times they know the lead lawyer, they already are familiar with them, but they want to know who's going to actually be doing the work, and are they the true superstars that that are supposed to be on their file. So, not to disagree with everybody that the people should be giving their own introductions, but I think having a lead lawyer or the moderator, as the case may be, provide that introduction and say the things that people may not feel comfortable saying about themselves is actually kind of important.
I think that's a great point, Neil. And I know our panel had addressed earlier on sort of knowing the format, right? Johan had talked about that earlier, like what is the format you're going into? Not just how many people are going to be there and who are they? Are you speaking on a panel, or are you going into a client meeting where the lead lawyer should be introducing? And I think that's something to keep in mind when deciding, one, what to say, two, how to say it, and three, who's going to say it. What is that format and what is that audience? And it's not one size fits all. And Neil has made a very good point in that.
Yeah. One thing that spoke to me, I guess, on sort of the engaging part and how you guys introduced yourself, the mini panel to begin with, is how Johan talked about what he, I think, sort of loved to do. I don't remember the exact words you used, but it was sort of, what do you like about your job? You sort of said, I like to do X, Y, and Z. And I think if you can, if an introducer can connect that to the audience, and know what the audience is there to hear and learn about, as soon as you tell the audience that you like to do what they're there hungry to absorb, I think you've caught them. I think is an interesting thing, interesting way to approach that. Another thing that to me sort of strikes me, especially in the Zoom format where you don't have the body language and the ability to do the things that Desiree was talking about, is, I guess, if you can sort of engage people by name. If you say, well, if you're talking about doing transfer pricing, and I know Neil Sheehy is trying to move into, to get into Germany, so Neil's going to talk to Harold. You started calling all these people by name in something by just sort of working them into the conversation. And I think, that's a way to also sort of bring in this engagement where you don't have this ability to kind of people to see your body language. It's a just another sort of hook, but I think it's been a great program. And one thing that struck me is, what's the balance between sort of how long an elevator pitch should last? Because sometimes if it goes long, you probably dig yourself into a hole. Sometimes if it's too short, you're not telling them enough. I guess I'd be interested, in, obviously it's not a one size fits all, but I mean, what's the panelist recommendation? Is this a 60 seconds or less to Rocky's, or I guess, it was Sonia's point, I guess, or maybe it was Rocky, about sort of how fast elevators are. I mean, is there elevator pitch? Should it be 30 seconds less, 60 seconds less? I mean, sometimes you drag on and people like to hear themselves talk. So like I'm doing right now. So I guess be curious to know what the panel thinks about that.
I would recommend under 30 seconds. Whatever fits into 30 seconds is probably what people will grab and remember anyways. So if you go longer, you might reassure yourself of covering all the angles, but people won't remember it. And what is it? They remember 9% of what you actually say. The rest is how you say it and the way you say it. So again, if you're in a pitch on a panel and it's your opportunity and you have 5 minutes to sell yourself, well, use up that 5 minutes and you should have the attention of the panel. But for your pitch or selling yourself, it is an opportunity. But if you're going to be speaking and you have like an hour long of content and you want to introduce yourself at the beginning, probably 30 seconds is more than enough.
I would agree with Johan on that. And he talked about you kind of dig yourself into this hole where you feel you have to put everything in there and you don't. Yeah, I think you need to, prepare, know who your audience is, as much as you possibly can, and fill that 30 seconds with the things that will be important to that audience. I think all of the speakers, myself included, I do way more than what I said in my intro but speaking to this group, that's what's important to them. And I think that's something that we all need to be conscious of when we're introducing ourselves. Sure, we have a bio that's 20 pages long, but what are the 3 things or the 2 things that will speak to the audience at hand? And it's going to be different every time. And I think that's just something that we need to keep in mind. And I think probably my biggest takeaway is there is no one size fits all for these.